Well, everybody, 2020 is upon us. It's time to look back at the last decade, which is a rather interesting decade for the horror genre, and, just look at some of the worst films that the last decade has given us. This is, you know, mainly just based on my personal experience with the genre, and I'm going to be going through in order from films released 2010 to 2019, going through and just kind of talking about kind of a free-form way about these movies I picked. So, starting off with in 2010, we have the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. I remember seeing this film when it came out, and because I went to see it the weekend it came out, I didn't want to admit to myself that it was a bad movie. I tried to convince myself for the longest time that this movie was misunderstood, that it was actually, kind of better than the original in some ways. It was also because I liked Jackie Earle Haley. He was very great in Watchmen, and I was a very big Watchmen fanboy around that time. So I was just super hyped for this film, and what I found was a very average modern horror film that at best is a very mediocre take on a classic film in the genre. Next, another film 2010 I wanted to talk about was Birdemic: Shock and Terror. A lot of people said that this is like one of the best bad movies ever made. Birdemic is kind of like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, but really fucking bad. It's honestly kind of painful how bad this movie is, because there are people who legitimately think this film is funny, but I don't get it. I saw it and I was more bored than anything else. It was a movie shot with no money by a crazy person, and it almost feels like it was shot with the intent of being a so bad it's good movie, with these overly long pauses and everything, and the really, really bad, shoddy PNG, like, cutout bird effects they used for the film. But no, this was something that was released, and this person who made it expected you to take it seriously. Also from 2010, we have Slow Torture Puke Chamber, the final entry in the Vomit Gore trilogy. The Vomit Gore trilogy is arguably the worst horror series I've ever seen in my entire life. I would honestly rather sit through I'd rather sit through the rape zombie movies again than sit through these pieces of shit. It's just painful mix of vomit fetish porn with fake snuff and, somebody's childhood home movies thrown in. It's fucking bad. Let me see here. Okay, going into 2011, we have Megan is Missing, a film that is a really, like, shoddy, poorly acted, barely believable found footage horror film directed by the guy who is, he's like the head of the official like cinematographers guild in the US, which is hilarious because this movie is so fucking poorly shot. It's an attempt at being this film with a message like, oh, don't let your kids spend too much time on the internet, with it basically being about this girl meets a guy online. Turns out he is a killer. Wow. And then the last, and the thing is, I remember watching this movie multiple times because it was on Netflix streaming, and I watched it with my cousin once, and I remember pointing out at one point, like, man, the picture quality is really good considering these are cell phone cameras from 2006. That's kind of weird that these cameras have the quality of a, average, HD camera that was made at the time, which was 2011 or 2010, early 2010s. And I remember also saying, like, man, the acting is really fucking bad. And my cousin snapped at me saying, this isn't acting, this is real. I'm like, if this were real, this would not be released to the fucking public. That's not how this shit works. But yeah, the last like 30 minutes of this movie are made up of footage that the guy who kidnapped the girl and her friend apparently shot. And it is like just really shitty pseudo snuff that isn't even as good as the worst shit in the August Underground movies. And I hate the August Underground movies. I'm sorry that I keep looking to my list. There's a lot of movies on this fucking thing. Okay. Yeah, we got another one. This is another one that's considered to be disturbing. We got The Bunny Game, which is a film about a prostitute who is kidnapped and tortured by a guy for like a very long time, and it's shot in this pseudo artsy experimental style with very harsh noise music in the background. It's just not pleasant from a visual or audio standpoint, and its attempts at being shocking are at best like, maybe like at best it's comparable to like the weak shit in the Saw movies in terms of how like uncomfortable and grueling some of the torture is. To top it off, the main actress in the film, apparently this is based on something that actually happened to her. Apparently she was actually kidnapped while working as a prostitute, and this stuff happened to her. And I'm just sitting here wondering, why would this woman want to relive all of this torture she suffered for a shitty art film made with no money, shot in the desert? Let's see. This, in 2011, we also got Chrome Skull Laid to Rest 2. Laid to Rest is not a movie that I'm a big fan of. I think it's an alright modern slasher film. It's got some really great gore effects, and that's something I can respect the director for, is sticking with the, legit practical effects. And the director of this of the Chrome Skull movies, of the Laid to Rest movies, was going to direct the remake of Chopping Mall, and it was going to be like a combination of The Fog and the original Chopping Mall, with it taking a more supernatural approach to it. And I was completely all for that. That sounded like a really cool movie, even if it's from a director who doesn't really know how to write tension as much as he knows how to write good kills. The project was taken away from him, and it's never going to happen, which kind of sucks. Because the director of the original, I believe, was Jim Wynorski, who didn't like the fact that it was going for a supernatural approach rather than a science fiction approach. You see by the fact that I'm not talking about this movie how forgettable it is. This is a movie I watched recently. I watched this film in 2019, and all I remember is it tries to explain the backstory of the killer Chrome Skull even more. And it tries to explain his backstory, and his backstory is like he's part of some underground snuff filmmaking ring, which I think would work better for a different kind of killer, because he gives off less a like snuff filmmaker vibe and more of a like, I don't know, like, mindless slasher and or contract killer vibe, like a cross between Jason and Agent 47 from Hitman. It's just a bad, sequel to an already bad slasher film, basically. Okay, getting into 2012, we got Silent Hill Revelation. I have so many people, I've had so many people say to me and argue with me whether or not the Silent Hill film adaptation is a good movie. And whether or not you think it's a good movie is kind of beside the point when talking about Revelation. Because Revelation took everything that was, actually of some level of quality in the first film adaptation and completely turns it on its head. While the first film adaptation kind of tried to respect the source material while also doing its own thing, this film completely disrespects it by, I remember specifically, there's a part where they throw in, like, fucking zombie clowns, like, eating somebody, I think, in one of the, like, hallucination scenes where You know, because in Silent Hill, there's all kinds of weird, crazy monsters, but like zombie clowns is kind of too stupid. I just remember the film being really fucking bad, and I have not watched it since I first saw it when I was in high school. Um, Next we got Bigfoot County, which is a found footage film from 2012. That is arguably one of the worst found footage films I've ever seen in my entire life. It's essentially the Blair Witch Project, like a shot for shot kind of retread of the Blair Witch Project, except you replace the Blair Witch with Bigfoot. And spoiler alert, they don't find Bigfoot. It turns out it's a bunch of rednecks fucking with them, and then they get killed by the rednecks, and their camera's left on the side of the road running, and then in the very last shot, you see Bigfoot walk out of the fucking woods. And it is just so bad. It's fucking awful. And to top it off, he looks worse than he did in that famous, Bigfoot footage, that really famous, clip of Bigfoot walking through the woods. That's like, it's pretty famous because it's I'm pretty sure it's been proven it's fake, but it reminds me of that, except it looked worse. Let's see. Next, we have House at the End of the Street. There was this thing with in the 70s and like early 80s with there being occasionally a movie here or there that changed its title to sound more like it was related to Last House on the Left. You had The Last House on Dead End Street. Ooh. You had Last House on Dead End Street. You had House on the Edge of the Park, and you even have some modern ones like Last House on Hell Street. There are more movies than this. I know there are. I'm just blanking on them. And this is like the modern equivalent, except Last House on the Left wasn't even relevant when this film came out. I have not seen this film since I saw it in theaters when it came out, which was 8 years ago. So I just remember walking out of the theater and being like, man, that was a movie that I just paid money to see, and I wish I didn't. Let's see. Paranormal Activity 4, in all honesty, I remember the first Paranormal Activity movie came out in like 2007. People were freaking out about it, saying how good it was. I saw it and I was like, yeah, that's an alright movie. Like, it's not amazing, but it's kind of enjoyable. It's fun as like a spooky little flick. The sequel was boring as all hell. The third one was kind of fun if you want to have some popcorn, if you want to have a popcorn movie to watch or some background noise. This one, I'm pretty sure in this one, this is the one, this is the one where they literally use fucking Xbox Kinect to try and track ghosts, which is the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life. And it really dates the movie. It really shows what era the film was made in. I know the one that came after that was the Marked Ones, which the Marked Ones was actually, it was bad, but I kind of liked the plot of that one, so I give that one a pass. Let's see, The Devil Inside, a really shitty found footage demon possession film that instead of showing you the ending, it tells you to go to this website to find out what happened next. But that website has been down pretty much since the movie came out, so you never really know. Let's see. Oh, Rape, Zombie, Lust of the Dead. Basically an attempt at a zombie film where all men are turned into rapist zombies. That is the entire plot of the movie. And yes, this is a Japanese film, if you could not tell. Let's see. Moving from 2012 on to 2014, I couldn't find anything for 2013, at least that I could think of, really. Moving on to 2014, we have The Devil's Due, which was basically a found footage remake of Rosemary's Baby, but really fucking bad. I remember them releasing like officially licensed condoms for the film because it had to do with a demonic pregnancy, which I always thought that was kind of funny. But I always remember this movie being mostly just really forgettable and boring. In 2014, we also have Nosferatu versus Father Pipecock and Sister Funk, which is a movie that takes Nosferatu and chops it up, dubs over it, and combines it in with this cheap blaxploitation plot, with there being a black um, priest who is trying to fight Count Orlok, and the black priest is Father Pipecock, and he's played by the director who is playing the role in blackface. I couldn't make this up if I tried. Let me see here. Going on to 2015, we got Black Mass of the Nazi Sex Wizard, the fourth and final, at least so far, film in the Vomit Gore series, and this one is basically Vomit Gore the Christmas special. It's fucking bad. Excuse me for just a second here. We gotta jump back to 2012 here for a quick second to mention a movie that I completely forgot. I don't know how I forgot. Maybe it's because the movie is just too painful. To add a movie by the title of Evil Dead Inbred Rednecks. I remember when I watched this for the first time when live streaming with Andrew, and it is one of the most painfully bad, like, trying to be ironically funny bad movies I've ever seen. You know, like, there are bad horror movies where you can tell they tried and it's charming and fun despite it being bad. And there are bad horror movies where they tried to make a bad movie or they tried to be kind of self-aware about it and it turned out pretty okay. This is like quite literally the lowest of the fucking low, and I think this is contender for one of the worst of the last decade. Going on, we have the 2015 remake of Pascal Langier's Martyrs, which I did a 25-minute long review of in early 2016. It is a very fucking old video, but it is essentially me doing what I'm doing now and explaining that it is one of the worst modern horror films ever, one of the worst remakes of a foreign film ever. It takes everything that the original did very well and everything that the original does, you know, it takes everything that makes the original so good and completely bastardizes it for the sake of, you know, selling fucking tickets, which this movie wasn't even released in theaters, so yeah. Or at least it wasn't released, wide release. Another one contender for one of the worst horror movies of the decade is Hashtag Horror, which is a really bad, painfully cringy attempt at being a cyber horror film having to do with this app causing people to be this app, the social media app, which inspires people to commit murders kind of inadvertently, and they post them on there. It's really bad, and it stars Chloe Sevigny, who is not good in it at all. Let's see, we got Evil Bong 420. I'm gonna go ahead and put all of the 2010 Evil Bong films on this list in this video. Just put them all right here. 420, High Five, 666, and 777. They're all some of the worst attempts at being ironically funny that I've ever seen in my entire life. Probably up there with Evil Dead Inbred Rednecks, honestly. We got Last Girl from 2013. I remember watching this movie about a year or two ago. I probably think it was about 2 or 3 years ago. And I honestly don't remember much about it. I remember it having to do with like a snuff film ring and it being a found footage film and the main character of it being really fucking annoying. And then at the end she kills herself, so it's like, what was the point of that? Oh, we got Terror Toons 3, another contender for one of the worst movies of this decade. I like the first Terror Toons movie. It's not good. I like the first two, actually. They're not good movies at all. They're awful, but they're kind of charming in the sense that, you know, they just tried to be the worst they could be. They're just god awful movies, but they're really entertaining and enjoyable if you enjoy bad movies. This one is just really painful, and it takes everything that was really funny about the first two Terror Toons movies and replaces it all with really bad CGI effects. We got Shark Exorcist, which is very bad. I'm gonna start skipping over some of these I don't have much to say about. Shark Exorcist is fucking god awful. Let's see, what else do we got? Going to 2016, we have The Night of Something Strange, which is a film I randomly watched about a year or two ago, and I was hoping for just a fun, kind of splattery, stupid horror comedy, and what I got was a horror comedy about an STD that, like, turns people into mutant zombie monsters. And that's not a bad idea for a horror movie. There have been horror movies done like that. There's a segment of the anthology film Night Terrors that is exactly that. However, this movie is so painful in its attempts at gross out humor. It's like it's like watching a fucking 15-year-old try and write clever, like, humor. It just comes out as really dumb, gross out humor, and it isn't charming or funny or enjoyable at all. It's almost as painful as Evil Dead: Inbred Rednecks. And as far as I remember, the film almost takes place entirely, like, at a motel at night. It's fucking bad. You can see how this is just wearing down on me mentally. Jesus. 2017, we got Insect, which is an animated film. I say animated because it's done in MS Paint. I'm, like, probably not even joking. That's probably where it was done. This is a film I saw on Amazon Prime a few years ago, and I was like, this is weird in the sense that, like, this got put on Amazon Prime. I know there's a lot of garbage on Amazon Prime, but this is, like, the most garbage thing I've ever seen. You know, I've heard people say, "Oh my God, how could they release Where the Dead Go to Die?" That movie is horribly animated, but, like, at least it's kind of animated. Insect is not. It has to do with these two brothers, and after their parents die, they find a giant bug in their parents' room that's, like, responsible for their parents' death. And there's a lot of references to Phantasm, with, like, every character being named after a Phantasm character. Even their dog is named Tall Man. And their friend is named Angus, as in Angus Shrim. And you have Jody and Reggie. You have a lot of references to Phantasm for some reason. Not that that's a bad movie, but still. We got Wish Upon that year as well, which Wish Upon, while it is one of the worst of the decade, it's also one of the most hilarious attempts at, like, modern horror I've ever seen. I swear, I watched that movie on a whim, and I have not laughed that hard at a modern horror movie since. I highly recommend that one as a bad movie. I actually own that movie. I own a copy of that movie because it is so entertaining. Let's see. Now we got one film that might take the cake for the most disgusting horror film of the decade. Not even in the sense that it's, like, gruesome or explicit in its gore or anything like that, but because of its politics. Allow me to explain. The film I'm talking about is Del Playa. Del Playa is a film that came out in 2017. And it is a slasher film based on an actual mass murder that took place in 2014 in California. The guy who committed the murders, I don't want to name names because just by saying his name, I think that, you know, you're kind of basically giving him what he wants because he wanted to be famous, and that's what he got from doing this. He killed his two roommates and went on a shooting spree and killed a few other people before killing himself. This guy had a YouTube channel, and he constantly posted about why women don't like him, and said things along the lines of, "I have a nice car, I have all this money, why won't women like me?" and he wrote his own manifesto as well, which has become the, I guess I'm just gonna say the word again, manifesto of a group of losers on the internet known as incels. Yeah, and for some reason, somebody in Hollywood thought, man, the tragic story of this guy's death. Not necessarily that his death was tragic, uh, but the fact that everything surrounding his death was tragic. Let's make a film about it, but make him extremely sympathetic. And then once he finally snaps and starts torturing and killing women, and blaming them for why his life is bad, let's then take that and turn it into a misogynistic, sleazy slasher film. There's a part in this film where after like a school dance or something, he gets his ass kicked by a bunch of bullies, and it tries to be like this really shocking, gut-wrenching, like you feel bad for this character moment, but it's more like it reminds me of the scene from Karate Kid where Daniel gets his ass kicked by the Cobra Kai guys that are dressed up as skeletons. And, you know, for a kid's movie, that scene always has really stuck with me as, like, legitimately uncomfortable and distressing and disturbing, even. Like, it's a really intense scene for a family film. And it's comparable to this scene, except this scene isn't thrilling, or not necessarily thrilling, but isn't intense or uncomfortable. It's just laughable. And it's really, really fucked up to take a story of somebody who was, you know, I'm just going to say it, as downright evil as this person was, and turn it into a misogynistic slasher film and attempt to get you to feel something for his character when he was a bad person in real life, and in the movie he's a bad person. Again, one of the most disgusting films of this last decade, and in terms of true crime films, one of the worst I've ever seen. Not even because it's like inaccurate, but because it is just so unapologetically, like, you know, I guess you could say offensive to people to anybody who has anything to do with this incident. You know, I felt fucking uncomfortable watching it. I'm sure anybody who knew this person or had family members who were killed by this person, I'm sure they feel even worse. I'm sorry I had to get depressing there. We're gonna pick it up a little bit. Next we have Satan's Slaves, which is an Indonesian film that is a remake of an Indonesian film from the 70s that was apparently a remake and or ripoff of Phantasm. This film, however, 2017 Satan's Slaves, is like a Indonesian Blumhouse film. It's this, like, bad, like, monotone in color, supernatural horror film full of jump scares. Like, I swear, if you were to, like, remake this film and have it be exactly the same other than the actors and the language it's in, and you told me to guess what studio produced this, I would say Blumhouse, because it's really just, it feels like an Indonesian director saw what was popular in the US and was like, hey, let's do that. We got Death House from 2017 as well. Death House was a film that was hyped up for the longest time. I remember hearing about this in like 2014 or 2013 maybe, when the script was originally written by Gunnar Hansen, who passed away this last decade. Rest in peace. He was the original Leatherface, and he wanted this to be the Expendables of horror icons. And there are a lot of horror icons in the film, but none of those icons can make this film any more watchable, because this movie is cheap, unwatchable garbage, and the plot is just some of the stupidest shit I've ever seen, involving a maximum security prison full of all these crazy killers who are all played by horror icons. And they also have some kind of connection to like a doomsday cult and opening the gates of hell or something. Like I don't know why they couldn't just, you know, just make a film where it's them in prison and then, you know, power goes out, they all get let out of their cells, and there's mass hysteria, and why they had to throw in all this extra bullshit. But it was bad. It's if I was any of these horror icons, I would be very ashamed to have been part of this movie. Let's see. We got Alien Covenant, which is probably the worst alien film of this last decade, probably the last 20 years. Definitely the worst one since Resurrection, which is still the worst. A weird homoerotic, unintentionally hilarious, like film that attempts to. You know, I've had friends before. I've had friends of mine say Prometheus was a bad movie because it's trying to explain the origins of the xenomorph. But the xenomorph doesn't need an origin story. It's scary as is, and that is definitely true. However, the origin aspects in Prometheus are very minuscule. In this film, however, they are so fucking ridiculously, needlessly complicated to the point that this feels like a fan fiction that they ripped off the internet and added gay robots to. Yeah. We got the Cloverfield Paradox, which is 2018. You know, I didn't like the first Cloverfield film. I've always stood by my opinion that that movie is not very good. 10 Cloverfield Lane was definitely more interesting and a step in the right direction. I randomly watched that one. I had no interest in seeing it really, but after watching it, I was like, yeah, no, that's a pretty cool, pretty interesting little movie. Um, and this one, it feels like somebody tried to remake Event Horizon, but they removed all of the good qualities of Event Horizon, and that's the best way I can put it. Let me see here. Next, we got The House That Jack Built from 2018, which is one that I literally watched on the same day that I watched Death House, mind you. The House That Jack Built is an arguably a well-made movie. It's directed by Lars von Trier, and don't get me wrong, I think Antichrist is legitimately a really great film. I think it's a great art house film. It's a film I have a lot of respect and love for. However, Lars von Trier as a person, he's a very edgy guy. He says and does things just to be like, hey, look at me, I'm being controversial. And people still seem to think that his movies are good. It's a well-made movie. But there are a lot of aspects of it that are not good. The first aspect being this movie is basically an incel's wet dream, with there being moments of dialogue where Jack is murdering a woman and cutting off her breast and making a wallet out of it. And as he's doing this, he's saying, if you're born male, you're already guilty. Men are always blamed for everything. Wah! And it's just like, wow, could you fucking preach to your audience of 12-year-olds who take your film seriously anymore, my guy? There's also an entire subplot with Jack describing his murders to somebody named Virgil. And he's trying to describe why these films are, why his murders are art. And don't get me wrong, there's scenes in this film I really like. There are. But he's attempting to describe why his murders are art. And it feels like the director is literally talking to the viewer, trying to say, you don't get it. My films are art. You do not understand this because you're stupid. There's also an entire segment where where Virgil and Jack talk about violence in movies, and instead of, you know, maybe taking some clips from like some public domain films, like taking some stuff from, I don't know, like Drive-In Massacre or Driller Killer or fucking Night of the Living Dead, you know, instead of taking stuff from public domain films that you can use for whatever you want, because there are some particularly gory moments in films that are in the public domain, in certain films at least. Instead of doing that, Lars von Trier chooses to put clips from his own movies in there. And the movie just feels like him jerking off and shoving his head up his own ass for nearly 3 hours. There's a handful of interesting moments in the film, but mostly it's just an edgelord continuing to be an edgelord. And I know that the film is supposed to be kind of ironic, like it's very obvious in its writing and in its like sick sense of humor that it is trying to be darkly comedic and it is aware that it is like kind of stupid. However, that doesn't change the fact that it's a painfully long movie that is not worth the runtime. There are three good scenes in the whole movie, those being the hunting scene, the ending, and the scene where the corpse is dragged across the concrete for like 3 fucking hours and there's nothing left of it when he picks up the corpse. Those are like the three best parts of the whole movie. Other than that, it's not good at all. On to the fucking last few. We got into 2019. We got I Spit on Your Grave, Deja Vu, a sequel I was very excited for because it's Miyazaki finally back in the director's chair after making Don't Mess with My Sister in the 80s, which I haven't seen yet, but that's basically, from what I've heard, that's kind of like his more studio kind of mainstream friendly like vigilante revenge film. But he's back with a sequel to his most famous film, I Spit on Your Grave. And, you know, I Spit on Your Grave is a good movie in its own regard. However, he makes a sequel that is not 3 hours, but nearly 2.5 hours long. It's nearly 3 hours long. And after the first about 10 to 15, hell, I'll even push it and say 30 minutes, this movie is just painfully boring. There's a bunch of really needless, stupid plot twists and reveals. It's just not good at all. It's kind of painful, actually. And the thing is, there's material there for an interesting movie, even as something that is a direct sequel to a film that came out 41 years ago. There's still material there. There's still something there you could use to make an interesting movie. But instead, it's like a cheap shot-on-video film. It's honestly worse than the Eden Video, I Will Dance on Your Grave kind of pseudo-sequels, which were basically just different horror films and thrillers rebranded as sequels to I Spit on Your Grave. The most famous ones being like Cannibal Hookers, Lethal Vengeance, and Killing Spree. Also, no, Savage Vengeance, Killing Spree, and I think Lethal Victims is the other one. I have it on my shelf. I think, yeah, Lethal Victims. And out of all of them, like, Cannibal Hookers is fun, at least. Savage Vengeance is god-awful. But even then, like, Cannibal Hookers is miles ahead of I Spit on Your Grave, Deja Vu. And that's a shame. Let's see. We got The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which, you know, like I said with Del Playa, I'll say it again. True crime films just kind of don't pan out, especially if you want to make them into horror films. You know, I've only seen like two true crime films two true crime films that are horror films that I think are at least, you know, somewhat respectful or interesting, and those being The Town That Dreaded Sundown and maybe Jim Van Bebber's The Manson Family. That one's kind of shaky, but you know, we had two movies this year based on Shannon, or at least not based on, but two films from this year that had something to do with Sharon Tate's murder, being murdered horribly. And one of them was a Tarantino film where they literally sexualized Sharon Tate and had her barefoot in a movie theater for no fucking reason other than to have shots of her feet, which, in my opinion, is just as egregious as the second one, which is having Hilary Duff portray Sharon Tate and have it be like she had premonitions of her death before she was murdered. The guy who made this is also working on a film about the murder of Nicole Simpson, I believe, O.J. Simpson's wife, who was murdered by O.J. And I get a feeling that this is gonna be the same thing over again. And this guy who directed this is the guy who directed Never Sleep Again, which is this 4-hour long documentary about Nightmare on Elm Street. That's a really great documentary, but it's just like this guy is not worth supporting, honestly. On to the last one, we got The Fanatic, which is directed by Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit. And The Fanatic, what can I say about it? It's an egregious film in more ways than one. First of all, it's just a bad movie altogether. And then you have to add to the fact that the main character of Moose is supposed to be autistic, and he is written as this like freak show buffoon who is in every other scene either being insulted and made fun of or beaten up, or he's just doing and saying shit that makes autistic people look like non-functioning human beings. You know, and the thing is, Fred Durst even puts Limp Bizkit on the soundtrack of this movie. Doesn't even do it subtly. He literally has a scene where a character is like, "Hey, you like a little Limp Bizkit? Huh? A little biscuit? Like to play it nice and loud?" And he puts on his radio in his car. He's turning it up real loud. Like really, Fred? You couldn't like not pull your fucking dick out in this movie? Yeah, this is an egregious movie, not just because it's a bad, almost like the thing is like out of context. I remember before I actually watched this movie, I watched a few clips from it out of context, and I was like, man, this looks like it is going to be hilariously bad. And then I watched it myself, and these clips in context are less funny and more depressing. There's specifically a part of the film where the main character Moose threatens this guy who has been bothering him the whole movie, and he grabs him by the throat, and he says something along the lines of, "I wish Freddy Krueger would come and cut your head off, and it would roll into the street and get squashed by a truck, and blood would go everywhere, and everybody would laugh." And the way he delivers this line, like out of context, the way he delivers it is hilarious. It is the funniest shit I've ever seen in my life. But after seeing the film myself and seeing that line spoken in context, it doesn't feel like it's a guy that's, you know, snapping, and it doesn't feel like what it feels like when it's out of context, which is a guy attempting to portray a character that is, you know, finally been pushed too far. It more feels like a character that doesn't understand why people are making fun of him and beating him up, and he's finally snapping and, you know, and you know, attacking the people that are attacking him, but he doesn't seem to understand why he wants to do this, and it's kind of depressing, in all honesty. When I heard that Fred Durst was making a horror movie starring, you know, starring John Travolta, I thought it would be funny, but no, it's painful. It's very painful. And with that, we have that. I think that's probably it. This has been the worst films of the 2010s, the worst films of the last decade. I was gonna do this as like a single video, but after looking at the runtime of this and looking at that I'm like 45 minutes of footage, I'm not gonna upload this as one thing with my best of the year, because I know the best of the year, not best of the year, but best of the decade, because I know the best of the decade video is going to be very, very long, even longer than this one probably. So I'm just going to upload the worst of first, and then I will do the best of, and then I will start working on my best of the year list for 2019. I'll probably leave out... Actually, no, I don't even have too many of the movies on my best of the year list for 2019 on my list for best of the decade, other than like my number one spot, really. So yeah, that's it for now, guys. This was like a quick little impromptu video. I'm not even gonna do an overlay or anything. This is just me rambling for fucking almost an hour. If you made it this far, I appreciate it. If you like the content, be sure to let me know. It's always good to have some kind of encouragement. when I'm just producing this content strictly for fun. Anyway, guys, this is Biscuit Boo Horror Reviews signing off. Peace.